Brilliant. I'll make a start if that's okay. So, hello and welcome, everyone. Nice to have you all join us this afternoon. My name's Ed, and I've got the pleasure of hosting this debrief with you today. My role here is I'm chairing today's briefing, but I'm also one of the heads of regulatory portfolio, which means I have the pleasure of leading our student insight team here at the OfS. And previously, before working at the OfS, used to work in students' unions and in universities on all things student engagement, course reps, and things like that. So it's great to be kind of here with you this afternoon to talk to bring you through this quite active topic that we'll be talking about today, freedom of speech. So if this is your first student debrief, welcome, pleasure to have you. Or if you've been to our student debriefs before, welcome, lovely to see you again here. So I'll just quickly take you through how today's session will work. I'll also quickly introduce you to the team. So as I said, my name's Ed Burrell. I'm one of the heads of regulatory portfolio. Today I'll be joined by my wonderful colleagues, Arif Ahmed and Liam Izod, who will introduce themselves in a few moments to you and kind of talk you through everything. But they're our great freedom of speech team here at the OFS, and so they'll be, really great to be able to talk you through this process and hopefully have quite a fun and interactive session lined up for us today. We will also share some other news with you as well around the OFS. So, we'll also obviously be doing a deep dive today into our topic of freedom of speech. And as I said, we're hoping this will be quite an interactive session for us all. So we'll open the floor to kind of questions in general. And so, yeah, you've got plenty of opportunities to kind of get involved in this topic today. Just to say, we do need to caveat that we won't be able to talk about any live cases or individual providers as part of this, but we're very happy to kind of talk about, principles behind everything and any kind of broader questions that you have, really. So we'll share a lot of information kind of with you, but yeah, we really encourage you to kind of be open with us, interact with us, and yeah, kind of let us know your thoughts, and your input is really greatly received here. So speaking of how we'll use your input, these events are really a great way for us to hear about your views, so please do share them with us and your experiences. We really do want to understand kind of lived student experience, and so this is a great way for us to have a kind of two-way dialogue with yourselves and to make sure that we are truly acting in the interest of students. Just to make you aware that kind of any comments or thoughts or feedback you provide, we will be listening to, acting on, well, or considering, and utilising it to inform our future policy work. So some of the kind of concepts that we talk about may be used in future OFS publications. However, anything that we do use will be anonymised and won't be kind of, will be unnamed and not kind of attributed to particular individuals. Just to also say a couple of other housekeeping points as well. We are recording today's session up until a certain point, and we'll make it very clear at what point we stop the recording. We'll also be sharing kind of the slides and everything afterwards as well. Just to say, we do recognise that freedom of speech is quite an emotive subject and topic. So, please do be respectful of each other's views as we kind of navigate through this particular topic as well. As I said, we're really keen to hear your views and to gather your input as well. And so we really do appreciate your kind of openness and engagement with us. Just to say, we are going to be using some polling technology and some whiteboard activity as well. And whilst we've tried to keep these as anonymous as possible, we can't guarantee anonymity through it. So if you do have any questions, concerns, or want to feedback separately to us, you can always email info@officeforstudents.org.uk and feed into us separately if you would prefer to use that method instead. But otherwise, like I said, we've got quite a live interactive session hopefully lined up for you now. Just to also reiterate again, we can't talk about any specific individual cases, unfortunately, or particular providers, but again, it will be really useful to kind of hear about your kind of general thoughts, feelings, and if there's any kind of particular areas that you want us to discuss. We also just want to say thank you for pre-submitting a number of questions. We've received all of those, and so we'll be going through some of those questions at the end in our Q&A session. We will also be opening up to the floor as well, so please do use the Q&A function. If you have any particular questions, we'll be coming to those at the end of the session as well. So I thought I'd just give you a few other updates before we kicking off into our session here. So last month, you may have seen, we announced the results of our sexual misconduct survey. So back in January, we invited all final year undergraduate students who are completing the National Student Survey to take part in an additional survey looking at sexual misconduct. It's the largest prevalence survey of its type in the UK, and it follows our kind of new requirements under a new condition of registration we have called E6, which basically enables us to work with providers to kind of tackle harassment and sexual misconduct and to make sure that they are, doing what is required of them. Our results actually showed that 24.5% of final year undergraduate students who responded to the survey had experienced sexual harassment since starting their studies, and around 1 in 7, or about 14% of the students, had also experienced sexual assault or violence. So this kind of clear data really shows to us kind of the experiences that students are facing, and we really hope that this data is really useful for schools and colleges, universities and colleges and higher education providers to really understand this issue and tackle it more effectively moving forward. This week, we've also shared some new insight into the experiences of disabled students as well. So we know from the National Student Survey and other research that we've conducted, the students with disabilities tend to view their higher education experience less favourably than their non-disabled peers. And this insight really covers that in much more detail and suggests several ways that universities and colleges could look to address the underlying issues. So yeah, please do take a look at that piece of research, because yeah, it's really insightful to understand kind of lived experience of disabled students and what we can do collectively as a sector to try to address these. And finally, we also released a video in September, a little short film to kind of boost student awareness of the OfS. It's about 1.5 minutes long, so it's a really great way to be able to kind of understand what we do, who we are, and so yeah, it's definitely well worth a watch. And we'll put links to all of these in the Q&A function, and we'll distribute those to you as well. And you can find out much more about all of this on our website, and I'll come more on to kind of other ways in which you can get involved a bit later in this session. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to my colleagues, Arif and Liam, and I'll ask them to kind of introduce themselves and bring you through the rest of the session.
Hi there. Have we got Arif in a room over there, in a very distant room? It's just the camera's just found you. Um, and yeah, perhaps you'd like to say hello first, and I'll pick up.
Thanks so much, Liam. Hi, everyone. Good to see you. And thanks very much for coming along. And thank you, Ed, for the introduction. So just to introduce myself, my name's Arif Ahmed. I'm the Director for Freedom of Speech and Academic Freedom here at the Office of Students. And I'll pass you on to my colleague, Liam.
Hey, I'm Liam. I work with Arif on the free speech team, and I think I'm going to be introducing the topic, and Arif's going to be sort of popping in to add colour and interest. So let's move on. We've not got much time, so I'll try not to go too quickly, but we're hoping to talk a bit about discuss free speech, about the context, the evidence, what's going on, what our role is in all this. And then we're also very keen to hear from you. We are going to do some case studies, or at least one time dependent, where there'll be a poll, but then we're going to move on to some questions that we'll ask you, and we'll open whiteboards to hear your thoughts on that. And then, of course, questions that you may want to ask us to finish off. So let's move on to what we're talking about. So free speech, freedom of speech and academic freedom are concepts that we sort of defined on the slide there. And of course, looking at free speech, it sounds very simple, imparting ideas and viewpoints through speech, writing, and images. We all do that all the time, one hopes. But we all know also that in certain contexts, you can get in a lot of trouble for expressing ideas, religious or political ideas in different countries, which can lead to imprisonment or worse. And I think the idea here is that a society isn't healthy if there's that sort of repression of free speech, and that in that kind of context, if you can't speak out, then how will you know that mistakes have been made, and how will you rectify them, or how will good ideas be advocated for and adopted? There'll be no mechanism to do that without free speech. So free speech goes beyond university context, of course. It's a much broader one, but there's a sort of sense that if it isn't healthy in a university, then where is it going to be healthy? And so that's why we have a particular role in free speech in universities or higher education providers, which we'll speak to, and it's why we're very keen to hear from you. So I've also got academic freedom on the slide there, which is a sort of more university-specific concept, and in a sense, it's somewhat analogous. So the freedom of academic staff to sort of follow their instincts wherever they may lead, and there's good examples of this where a view that would seem fringe becomes important and mainstream, and that the academic wasn't victimized for it when it was fringe, being an important part of that sort of development in the discipline. A good example, I think, is sort of economics, where even sort of 20, 30 years ago, it would have been quite fringed to advocate for the consideration of the environment in the sort of calculus that economists use. And it's possible academics in certain contexts could have been suppressed for expressing those views, or at least sort of not taken seriously. But because they, on the whole, weren't, the discipline has evolved, and certainly that's a very important part of the discussion right now. And the Stern report being a good example of that. So I've also put there on the slide that both these concepts exist within the law, at least in the UK, well, in England, which we're talking about principally. That there are sort of limits, and the line where the law comes in and free speech can be proscribed is a very interesting topic in any given context, and hopefully the case studies will sort of try to illustrate that to some extent. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So just expanding on what I've already said, why should we value free speech? I've spoken to this a little bit, but it's important to remember that free speech has been a great friend to and a great tool of minority movements, which would once have been considered very radical and dangerous. So gay rights and racial equality movements needed free speech and used it in order to advance their cause, advocate for it, and sort of change the discourse. And as we said on the slide there, if free speech is in place, then society can evolve and hopefully improve. There's a good point at the end there. Even if a view is wrong, you should feel free to express it. You should be able to express it. Otherwise, how will you know it's wrong? And I think it's also worth sort of pointing out this kind of goes both ways. Like, what if you might think, well, why should a wrong idea be expressed? But well, how do we know that ideas currently in the discourse aren't wrong if we can't engage with them and talk about them and critique them? And there's some very instructive examples, from history. For example, in the Soviet Union, where scientists who got political favor had the sort of essentially incorrect ideas on agriculture, and they couldn't be criticized because they had the era of Stalin, but their ideas ended up leading to famines, and it took decades before their mistakes were sort of finally reckoned with, because they weren't operating in an environment of free speech and academic freedom. That's an extreme example, but it's an important point. So hopefully we kind of agree collectively that free speech is a good thing. And if I move on to the next slide, I'll talk about, am I missing a slide there about our role in free speech? Perhaps I could, oh no, I see, okay. We're coming on to that. We're talking about this. There's reason to believe that free speech and academic freedom is declining in the UK. So there's a rather complicated graph on the screen at this point, but the key point is that there's this index of academic freedom on which the UK has UK score is declining. So currently we're only sort of 60th or 70th out of 180 odd countries, and this graph shows our position currently in 2024. That's the latest data we have, versus 2 decades odd earlier, 2000. And the UK's, whilst Ireland and Australia have more or less stayed on the line, which means their score hasn't really declined. UK and US's score has declined, along with countries like Russia and Hong Kong, whose scores have declined much more significantly. So there's reasons to be worried, basically, about academic freedom. And we've done our own polling as well, which we can link you to. And it shows that academics in the UK do have concerns about academic freedom and free speech. And interestingly, academics from minority backgrounds have greater concerns than the sort of the population average. So if we move on to the next slide, you can see that stat that was just written on the screen expressed in sort of pie chart form. And whilst white academics, are sort of, in the red there, they're somewhat concerned about not being able to discuss controversial and challenging ideas. Minority, non-white academics are more concerned, which is an interesting finding. And similarly, female academics are sort of, if we move on to the next slide, are more concerned than male academics about feeling free to discuss and research controversial topics, which is illustrated on this slide. So these graphics are taken from our public polling, which you can access and use and read at your leisure. So moving on to our interest. So what do we in the OfS have to do with all this? So as you know, we regulate universities, and we do that on the dimension of quality and financial health, but we also do it on the dimension of free speech, and that's partly because there was a piece of legislation, the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act, HEFSA for short, which was gained royal assent in a couple of years ago, but has recently been commenced in part, and it gives universities a duty to take, to secure freedom of speech, essentially, which is the top duty there, and on the slide. And we've published, as the OfS, some guidance on what this means in practice under the snappy title of Regulatory Advice 24. But I can assure you it's a good read, and I think we're going to link that as well, so you can have a look at that if you haven't already. We also have an interest in freedom of speech via our conditions of registration on good governance, which is on the latter part of the slide, and our relationship around enforcement and may evolve as well. But essentially, hopefully you've followed my argument that free speech matters. It may be under threat to some extent, and the OfS has a role in helping secure it alongside the universities and yourselves. So let's move on now to something that's a bit interactive, and hopefully we'll get your sort of synapses firing such that when we ask the questions to you and you ask the questions to us, everything's flowing nicely. So we've concocted a case study here where it's not a real example, but it's sort of hypothetical based on scenarios that have kind of come about in different forms. And we're going to explain it to you, and then we're going to get you to do a poll on your reaction, and then we will vary it slightly and do another poll. So let's kick off with case study A. So here,
just to say, Nick, we'll stop recording at this point.
Oh yes, thank you, Arif, for reminding me. So at this point, from this point onwards, there's an element of interactivity, and just to sort of try and minimize, any sense of, or try and increase the sense of anonymity, we're going to stop recording at this point so that